Well, hey everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 5 of the Apothecary Diaries, and I am so excited! Yes! So, this series has been so much fun so far, but I'm very, very excited as well because I have a copy of The Last Eunuch of China that has just come in, so thank you, Patreon, for supporting me getting this. And so I'm going to be reading this book and talking about it as we go through the episodes. I'm not going to guarantee that every episode I'm going to have a little segment to talk about, but that's my plan. I've technically read the first chapter, which had 4 parts, through these past day or so and in my off time. And so I've been very excited to read this. And I've got a few passages I'm going to share from it. So we're going to talk about that. But I also have other comments that I'm super excited to get to as well. Francesca White, 4166, noted that the individuals at the brothel where MaoMao works at might be considered courtesans and not concubines. And there is a difference between courtesans and concubines, and I'm glad that you pointed that out, Francesca. Whereas we know what concubines are from the Grand Palace and everything that we've seen in the last few episodes, courtesans, they're more artistic kind of women that show their artistry skills, and whether that be, I always think of kind of, it's not the same, so please don't misinterpret me, but kind of like Memoirs of a Geisha, of selling, like in that series, selling like the artistic skills that they have. It may or may not include sexual services. So even though the courtesans that talked to MaoMao back at her brothel clearly knew some sexual activities that they could do, they did not necessarily have to do them. So there is a difference. So if MaoMao does become a courtesan in this series, because the OP makes me think that she is going to have to do that at some point to maybe possibly work her way into the inner circle, maybe, who knows. If that does happen, it is good to know that she could be a courtesan known for her skills, not necessarily offering sexual favors. So that's good. I feel like I'm already getting very protective of MaoMao, and I'm like, leave her alone. She clearly isn't interested. So that was good to know. H Banana 7 noted that the Japanese title is called Kusaria no Hitorigoto, or All the Private Mumblings of the Apothecary. Why didn't they call this All the Private Mumblings of the Apothecary? I guess they didn't want it to be confused with like the 8,000 other isekai that are around right now. I can't say anything. I've not watched any of them, but I thought that was really interesting. And it's kind of clever because you think of private mumblings, private writings, a diary of the Apothecary, Apothecary Diaries. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That Apothecary Diaries does have a nice ring to it. So whoever translated that and made that title, good choice. Good choice. Ichu noted how it might have been arsenic in the powder that we've seen through episodes 1 through 4. But Anime Annie has something else to talk about that. We'll get to it in a second. Kaku pointed out that Jinshi's voice actor is also Kakeru from Run with the Wind. Love it. That MaoMao's voice actress is also an accomplished voice actress that, I didn't know this, has over like 60 anime songs to her register. She's like a very accomplished anime singer, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I wonder, you know, when you get a voice actor or voice actress that's really good at singing, do you take advantage of that in the show? It's kind of like whenever Miyano Mamoru is hired, they're like, can we sneak in a song? So who knows? Maybe she'll end up singing in this. I'm not sure. Gyokyo is, her voice actress is the same as Frieren, which is exciting to know. I can hear that. Lihua's is very interesting. Hers is Mikasa from Attack on Titan and Violet Evergarden. Violet Evergarden and Mikasa have not been as sassy as Lihua is, but I really liked that. And Gyokyo's voice actress is also Anya from Spy Family. Wild. Anime Annie pointed out that MaoMao's actions, I thought this was really important to bring up, and we're going to talk about this book here in a second, where this is concerned, but MaoMao's actions, where she's basically using her body as a test subject, kind of have this flavor to them that it's describing self-harm. And I thought that was really interesting to point out, because I wonder if this is going to be a way for her to possibly connect with Jinshi, because Jinshi has technically committed an act of self-harm. He's supposedly castrated himself. So I wondered if it was going to be something where Jinshi could connect and understand her better when he sees that she has been experimenting on herself and causing self-harm for her own betterment, and he might be able to relate and talk to her about it. That would be really cool. We'll see if that goes down. But also, Anime Annie was talking about how in the white powder it could have been lead, since that was a common ingredient in a lot of powders and actually was one of the reasons they suspect Queen Elizabeth died in 1603 because she wore a lot of face powder and it had lead in it. I always think of like the 1930s, 1940s commercials were like, here's that fine lead-based paint. And it's like them painting white fences and the white in the paint is from lead. So who knows? But I basically want to talk a little bit about this first section of The Last Eunuch of China. It basically follows Sun Yaoting. He was the last known eunuch to be alive in China who passed away in 1996. And he was born in 1902, which is interesting. He was born in 1902. And there's a big passage about, I mean, right now it's talked a little bit about his life growing up. His family was extremely destitute. His father had a good job, but then some people basically screwed him out of it, like you do. And they ended up being destitute, roaming from town to town. And what was interesting is in Sun Yaoting's hometown, we came to find out that there was a eunuch that was famous in the imperial palace, and he would come home and perform operas. There's really a great opening segment where Zhang, who is this prolific eunuch from that area, he would come in and bring like his servants with him. Like these eunuchs that were in the imperial palace had servants, kind of like Gao Shun working for Jinshi. They were able to come home and perform operas and bring home all this opulent goods to his community and to his family. And even the people that had like wronged him in the past were like kowtowing before him. And he has all this prestige. And Sun Yaoting, as a kid who was 6 years old at the time, he thinks like, well, that could be me. My family's living in poverty. We're destitute. I could be like him and bring wealth back to my family. And he gets this idea in his mind. It's also important to know that most of the eunuchs we talk about in this book so far, they are like the second and third sons. They're like the sons that aren't inheriting anything, so they got nothing to lose, right? Also point out that what's interesting is the father in the story, he didn't necessarily want Sun Yaoting to castrate himself, but he was kind of more okay with it. The mom in the story is like, no. She's like, if you don't perform this correctly, you can die. And if something happens to you, you're going to basically be an outcast for the rest of your life. She's like, all these things could go wrong. So we've got a little bit of time here. I want to read you a passage from page 12 to like 15 from this. I won't read the whole thing, but part 3 here that I just finished was basically describing the castration. I feel the need to tell you all this because knowing that Jinshi and Gao Shun went through a similar procedure to this, I think it's important context for us to know. So it says here, quote, from ancient Chinese records inscribed on bones and tortoise shells, we learn that victors in tribunal wars sometimes had their prisoners castrated as a form of punishment. But in many cases, castration was carried out. And it talks about during the Qing dynasty, the court had an institution in charge of recruiting eunuchs. So they had people that would go out and actively say, we need 40 eunuchs from your area, stat. And you just had to provide that. So it said the court had an institution in charge of the recruitment of eunuchs, and a few households in Beijing specialized in handling such affairs for generations. However, in many cases, castration was carried out in private, especially among poverty-stricken families, which is what happens with Sun Yaoting. The procedure was crude and brutal, often resulting in death. So it says that there was many methods of castration adopted. As a rule, the boy must be deprived of his manhood at an early age, because the technique that worked on a child might result in the death of an adult. So this castration presumably happened when they were young, right? To become a eunuch, the boy must not only have his genitals removed, but also lose reproductive function and sexual traits completely. In certain remote areas, the castration knot technique was once adopted. People would use a hemp thread and tie a knot at the root of a boy's testicles, obstructing the growth of his reproductive system. The testicles would gradually atrophy and they could be easily removed, and the boy would retain his penis for urination. We've actually done this with bulls. We've castrated bulls. You just put a band on their testicles and they eventually just fall off, and then they're steered, and it'll kind of like scab over, and that's pretty much it. They don't like having a bandage put on their, like a ring put on their testicles, but it doesn't cause them like immense harm. So, but that is not the method that happens to Sun Yaoting. I read that and goes, oh, well, that's a very simple method. That did not happen. No. A more bizarre method usually was carried out by an individual where that person would knead and squeeze a boy's testicles until they felt completely numb, and then would increase the pressure until the testicles were crushed. There was also a way to deprive the sexual organs of their function without removing them. In this case, the baby boy was given an oral medicine with an anesthetic effect and then stabbed with their testicles stabbed by a needle. Gradually, the testicles would lose their function and the castration was considered successful. However, the thing is, all of those methods, they don't seem as painful as what happened to Sun Yaoting, but the imperial court did not consider those methods to be good enough because they're like, well, what if something happens and the penis is still usable and the testicles still function? They're like, no. We're going to chop the whole thing off. We're like, no, take it all off. So they're like, that wasn't good enough. It said that successive dynasties, in all of those, almost all eunuchs chosen to enter the palace had to undergo a thorough castration with their genitals completely removed. So basically, there is like what happens in Sun Yaoting's case is that they can't go through these like wealthy departments and clinical ways to get the castration done. So he ends up doing it at home. And what it basically described is, it said, the father looked at his son nervously. Brace up, my boy. And he almost choked on the words. He tightened his grip on the handle of the razor, and with one hand he fumbled between Sun Yaoting's legs to take hold of his genitals, and with the other hand he brought down the razor. Blood oozed from out between his legs and dripped over the floor. His body twitched in agony, and he uttered a cry and blacked out. Basically, what ends up happening is that he was in a coma for 3 days after this occurs, and they describe a process where they heated up sesame oil and threw ash and sesame oil on this parchment and put it over the wound to help it like heal and scab over. And it just, the process of it in general, it was absolutely terrifying and horrific. And that's what he went through because he wanted to go work in the imperial palace and become famous. And where part 1 ends is that we find out that the emperor he's supposed to serve has just abdicated the throne. So right now, when I left off after chapter 1, basically the emperor he was supposed to go serve under abdicated the throne. So he's like, shit. So he's apparently about to go and try to live with the emperor's father, who still employs eunuchs. And we'll see where it goes from there. But it's really interesting so far. But I thought that whole method and was like, oh my God, if Gaoshun and Jinshi went through this, that sounds insane. And I want to know more. Now, of course, this is a fictional story that's drawing from other fictional experiences. So is it possible that Jinshi and Gaoshun don't have this horrific castration story? Probably. But I thought that was interesting for context, just so that we know. But yeah, I appreciate all the comments. I'm excited to read more of this book and tell you all what I find out, especially if it connects to the show, but we'll just wait and see. So I've talked for nearly 13 minutes. We need to go ahead and start this, but I'm excited for episode 5. I hope you all are as well, but we're going to dive in and start episode 5 of the Apothecary Diaries, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Y'all, I think my brain shut down about halfway through that episode. I was like, the moment Jinshi looked at MaoMao, it was like Rachel Lee Cook coming down the stairs and She's All That. It was just, he was like, the music started playing, the piano tinkering started going, and he was just like, you might as well have drawn the hard eyes. They were there. And then that conversation afterwards, we're going to talk about that hairpin. Don't you worry. Because I was in the episode going, well, wait a minute. Is this a sign of affection? Mm-hmm. Yes. We're going to talk about it. But so this episode, again, this series, it just completely subverts all of the things. And I didn't bring Whiteboard Coon out because we've just met the other 2 concubines. We don't know much about them. I have a feeling that Whiteboard Coon is going to come out next episode when we get more of an understanding about the other concubines. The only thing we know about the one is that she's very young and she's quite smitten with Jinshi. I'm like, aren't you supposed to be smitten with the emperor? But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about her when we get to her. But I was fully expecting this episode to focus on the fireworks or the things causing the rash. And we kind of basically, I feel like we're going to come full circle with it next week with the garden party episode. I'm sure that's what it's going to be, because it seems like they were setting something up and it's got onto Jinshi's radar and he's like, we need to keep track of that and watch out. I feel like Jinshi and Gaoshun are afraid that somebody is going to try to attack the Emperor, that somebody's planned like an inside gig, and that something's about to go down at this garden party, and that they're going to want to try to take care of it. That's what it feels like. I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like, so we'll just have to wait and see how it goes down. But, so we got the guy that was talking about having the rash, and then our covert operations, and we'll come back to him in a hot second. So Jinshi is freaking hot. Just hottest eunuch ever. Hottest eunuch ever. I like how in a lot of media that I've watched, like Western media, like Game of Thrones, the eunuch characters are portrayed as kind of like sneaky or sly or anything like that. And Jinshi is just a really hot guy, a hot peacock. Oh my gosh. So Basin is this one guy this eunuch that's like practicing with him, but I love he pulls his hair back into the ponytail and fights him. The fact that Jinshi is ripped, I need to know Jinshi's backstory. And I'm sure we're going to get it. He had a very visceral reaction to her talking about, being threatened of assault. So I'm wondering, did Jinshi go through that? Was he assaulted? Does he have experience with that? And so he knows kind of like her fear of that moment. He didn't say, but he felt very bad about it. And so we'll talk about that when we get to it. But Jinshi is ripped. And this guy, and then fighting, and Jinshi's also a really good fighter. So I like that they established this early on, that he's a good fighter, because they're like, don't worry, if something goes down, Jinshi's going to be able to protect the Emperor. Just you wait. So, I mean, Jinshi's working his way on up, right? I want to see Gaoshun in action. I want to see Gaoshun fighting. When we gonna get that? Basin is the one's name. And he's like, my brute force is no match for your technique, Master Jinshi. And he's like, but that force carries an astounding, you truly carry the Ma clan's blood. Interesting. So yeah, we get that whole idea of them training, that they're not just going to parties and walking around the courtyard for willy-nilly nothing. They are training and making sure that they can protect the Emperor and the ladies that are there in the back palace. This old lady that gets the opportunity to wash down Jinshi, she is here for the tea. She is here for all the gossip. You just see her behind him just smiling the whole time, and Gaoshun's like, Because, yeah, Jinshi's the one that asks how MaoMao is doing, and he's like, well, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, has she gained weight? Is she doing okay? Jinshi cares about her. He may not realize it to what extent it's showing, but he does care about her, and he's kind of like the other attendants to Gyokyo, where they're all trying to make sure that she's okay, and Gaoshun's like, well, I think she's gained some weight, I suppose. And he's like, oh, well, good, I see. And then when he sees, like, her attitude, and he thinks back to how she slapped that woman and was, like, so intense, and talks about being poison, he's like, it was unexpected seeing that side of her. Now, she had a pretty visceral reaction to it being poison and to the baby being poisoned and everything. I wonder if her mother was poisoned and her mother died of poison, and that's what has led her to do these experiments on herself and to try to discover all she can about poisons and become an apothecary. I wonder if that's the case, and Jinshi's kind of trying to basically Sherlock and figure this out. So, because he's like, she got really upset about it. And granted, while it was something to get upset about, he's like, she had a pretty visceral reaction, so what was the deal? So, I feel like he's going to try to figure it out, right? He's like, can't quite figure her out. Meanwhile, Gaoshun's like, are you okay? You're just kind of staring off into space. You know, you seem really concerned about her. And the old lady's like, The old lady, she knows. She knows he's into her. She knows. It's so funny that Jinshi's job is to try to seduce these women and reveal if they're traitors or not. And he has an attraction to MaoMao. And he's like, what are you talking about? MaoMao and Jinshi, though, they're going to be the most oblivious about it. Of course they are. Of course they are. And Gaoshun's like, damn it, no. He's just like, there's no helping them. So anyway, I like the fact that MaoMao, when she goes to gather all of these mushrooms, the doctor's going to give the official name of them here in a second, and she finds the mushrooms there, and she's like, oh, there's some over here too, and here. And then she's so excited. She's like, well, where should I eat it? Should I go to the kitchen? She's like, I don't want people to ask where I found it. It's kind of like here where I'm at in the Midwest in the United States, there are morel mushrooms. And I have friends that love to go hunt morel mushrooms and they like to saute and fry them. I'm not into them, but they say that they're really good. But it's like trade secret. Like, you don't find out where the mushrooms are. You don't find out. It's like kept secret. They don't want anybody to know. They got their truffle finding pigs. You ain't gonna find where those mushrooms are. And it's like very hardcore kept secret that you're not gonna know where those mushrooms are located at. So when MaoMao said she didn't want people to find out where they were because then they'd take her mushrooms, I felt that. I was like, man, girl, you would get along just fine where we're at. But all of the gyoza and the steamed buns, those all look amazing. And I like that she brings her friend from on the other side of the palace, steamed buns and food too. But they're trying to like make her gain weight because they think she's too thin. They want her to gain weight. You would think that her poison tasting job would keep her pretty satisfied, but what does the one friend say there? She's like, oh, did you hear? And she's like, what? And she says, I heard a palace servant was able to seduce a military officer who is famous for hating women. Now, that feels like it's going to be something to come back later, so we might spend next week on Whiteboard Coon writing that out. But yeah, so a military officer famous for hating women who was seduced by a palace worker. Now, a palace servant, one, doesn't necessarily mean a woman. And I think that's why MaoMao was like, oh, was it him? Because they're famous for hating women, and it's a palace servant. That doesn't mean it has to be a woman. And she's like, huh. And she's like, well, guess how she did it? And she's like, who knows? She used an aphrodisiac. Oh, so they do say the palace servant was a woman. So MaoMao believes that the servant that seduced the man got the aphrodisiac from Jinshi. Uh-huh. And she's like, oh, well, it must have been him. And she's like, but I don't know. She's like, it's probably nothing related, probably. So we don't know if it was Jinshi that gave her the aphrodisiac. We have no clue. But if he did, here's the thing. If Jinshi did give a palace servant an aphrodisiac to see if she would use it on an officer, that shows that she's cheating on the emperor. Or is she cheating on the emperor? Or because it's a palace servant, not a concubine? It's all just gossip at this point, and it's all rumors, but I feel like that story might come back around. It might be of relevance later on. I don't know. What it basically tells us in this moment is that MaoMao believes that Jinshi would give out those aphrodisiacs to anybody and wouldn't just keep them for himself, even though she told him they were pretty strong. But we'll see how that goes. I honestly like the doctor. I'm sure you all are laughing at me from the first couple episodes, but I was sure that the doctor was going to cause MaoMao all this trouble and he was going to be shady and he was going to be a big source of like a hurdle for her. But no, she has him eating out of the palm of her hand. So does Jinshi. But he ends up being a nice guy. And once she gets on his good side and is like, I'll make food for you. He's like, sure. And then that's all it took. I'm so floored. I thought that he was going to be like a big hurdle for her in this. But he's like, oh, those are Matsutake mushrooms. I'll go get the stuff to cook them on up. I feel like she wanted to hoard the mushrooms away too because she wanted to keep them to get on his good side. And she's like, if other people find out, they're going to take advantage of this. So yeah, I'm floored that he's in such a good mood around her. I mean, good for her, because to be an apothecary and to be a woman in this facility, you need to have this guy on your side. Otherwise, he's just going to make your life a lot more unbearable. So good for her. And that's around the time as they're eating the mushrooms. She's like, he's an accomplice. Yeah. She's like, I've got him in the palm of my hands. And that's when this guy comes in asking about the curse. So she gets the salve and stuff. And what he says is he talks about they're burning on the west side some stuff in a pit, and he's like, I was doing work as usual when I noticed, what does he say there? He says, I found a woman's dress with the bottoms of the sleeves burnt and wood writing tablets. So he was curious, but he just threw them in the fire anyway, and that's when they sparked and he had the rash on his arm, right? So I looked it up, and The thing that looks like it causes, I was like, is there anything from fireworks that could cause like a rash or anything near it? And what DermNet pointed out, which DermNet could not be a reliable source. We'll see. I feel like, again, it's something that was brought up this episode that's going to eventually be explained even further next episode. But they talked about rosin allergies. So rosin is like, it's kind of a glue that basically is on a lot of woods, and I'll give you a list here in a second, but it does cause a reaction where it causes your hands or anywhere the skin comes in contact with to become red and inflamed and itchy. As the reaction progresses, it can blister and become even more intensely itchy. And if it continues, dermatitis can eventually become chronic with lichenified skin. So basically they talked about things with rosin that could be on it were anything from adhesive products to caulking to, they said things like fireworks, things are involved with any type of pine or paper. Basically the fireworks thing is what led it up, but sawdust and sealants can have them. So, I mean, rosin is a pretty common thing to come in contact with, and it's not like a modern chemical or anything. So there's a very good chance that rosin could be involved in the wood of the fireworks that, you know, allows it to cause this allergic reaction. I don't know. We'll just have to see what they end up telling us in the episode. But she's like, you know, different things make it have different reactions. That's how fireworks work. So you probably come in contact with something on the wood. So put this on there and you should be fine. So then, of course, Jinshi shows up, right? And he's like, well done, Apothecary. And she's like, And of course, everyone around Jinshi is just enamored with him. The doctor's enamored with him. Everyone is. But MaoMao, what I love is she's just like, oh, hey. She's like, it's you. You've come here. She's like, no. And the thing about it is, we'll talk about Jinshi's reaction later, is it almost seemed like he was saying sorry because he's been flirty with her this whole time and acting like he's coming on to her, you know, because he's trying to get that effect out of her. But then after she tells him that she's deliberately made herself mismarked so that she won't be assaulted, he suddenly stops and it's like, oh. I feel like at that moment, Jinshi's like, everything I've been doing to try to flirt with you, no wonder you don't have a reaction to it, because that's not your jam at all. And because you've seen more of the world than a lot of these other girls might have. And you view it a little bit differently than they might have. And then I feel like he's like, oh shit, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have came on to you like that because that wasn't my intention. And she's just like, what? So she's like, what business do you have with me today? And he's like, oh, what are you talking about? Oh, do you mean I shouldn't talk to you unless I have business? And she's like, no. I love Gaoshin's just like, dude, come on, sir. What are we doing? And then he's like, well, I like that it doesn't work. And so he's like, well, follow me for a moment instead. And she's like, so then the poor doctor comes back and they're all gone except for the one guy with the rash. Poor doctor. At least the guy with the rash will be there. So what he does next is he has her in front of, he's like, how many colors are there? And she's like, well, I can't say specifically. They're fireworks. He's like, well, then how do you apply the colors? And she's like, well, with salts, you can dissolve them in water. But some will dissolve in other things like oil. So like the rosin and all that. That's what they're trying to figure out. But this is outside my expertise. And he's like, okay. And she's like, well, is there anything else that you want from me? And then he's like, hold on. I love when he says wait, and she's like, her eyes twitch. She's like, damn it. He's not just going to let me go. And she's like, what? And he's like, I like them teapot steamed. So it's the mushrooms. He's talking about the mushrooms. He's like, I would like you to make me some mushrooms that are teapot steamed, please. She's like, damn it. And that's when she says, oh, and he's like, I'm counting on you, Apothecary. And Gaoshin's like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, so he knew about the mushrooms. She's like, I'll see if I can find more tomorrow. So that's what she's talking about. That makes a lot more sense other than the fireworks. Meanwhile, as they're looking at all the different salts and things that would react, he's like, everyone who suffered burns, find them all. And we'll see what we can do. Because he's like, the colored wood tablets are probably some kind of code. And some people would only use that for something secret, right? What would that be? So are they planning on like sending a message, or there being a signal? Something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and I have a feeling that MaoMao and Jinshi are going to have to try to get to the bottom of it at this garden party. She's like, well, it's none of my business and nothing a food taster should be concerned about, but you know you're going to be concerned about it, girl. You know how this song and dance goes. Don't act like you're not. Yep. So they bring all of this, all the garments in, all the new dresses for the garden party in. I'm glad that they didn't end up stuffing her shirt, because one thing that I like about MaoMao is that she is not the stereotypical big-breasted woman with like the big shapely hips and everything. She's not Nami from One Piece. She's not Orihime from Bleach. As someone that's very small-chested as well, I relate a lot with MaoMao, and so I feel her. I'm like, yes. I'm like, girl, I get it. Not everyone is born with such things. And she's like, well, you have to wear this for the garden party. I also like how Gyokyo gives her like a very simple necklace. Like, she knows that MaoMao is not really big into jewelry. So she's like, I'll just give you a necklace and something very cute and simple, you know, that it won't make you stand out too much if you don't want to. So they have this garden party that happens twice a year for upper ranked officials to come to. And it's all an attempt for the emperor to figure out who he's possibly going to marry. And I'm like, well, how many years has he been having this garden party? Has he not figured out which one of them he wants to make his consort yet? But I guess not. So they're all contending to be the head consort. Now, we know from previous episodes that Gyokyo, she is the one that has a lot of political pull tied to her. There's a lot of people talking about trade between her area and the palace. So there's a lot of people pulling for Gyokyo to become the main woman, because she has a lot of political pull tied to her being the empress consort. So there are 4 high-ranking concubines that are the best contenders. Not the only ones, but the best. So Gyokyo from the precious consort with like the peony. And then you have Lihua, the wise consort. You have Lishu, the virtuous consort with like the little bellflower. And then you have Aduo, who's the pure consort. Aduo, she looks kind of like Jinshi. She also is wearing like the most rouge out of all of them. She seems very interesting. We don't get any of her personality yet. We get a little bit from Lishu. Lishu, who looks like she's from Cardcaptor Sakura. She is very young appearing, very ditzy appearing, and she has the hots for Jinshi, which, here's the thing, Lihua and Gyokyo do not. Neither of them care for Jinshi. Like, not in that way. Like, they don't blush around him. They don't go, oh my gosh, Jinshi-sama. No, they treat him like a eunuch. Like, he's the emperor's eunuch. Like, that's because they're both into the emperor. Lishu acting all flirty around Jinshi makes me a little suspicious of her, because she's not supposed to be. She's supposed to be, you know, loyal to the emperor. So, I don't know. We'll see. So Lady Gyokyo and Lady Lihua couldn't attend last time because they literally just had kids, but now all 4 of them are going to go. So if something's going to go down, it seems like it's going to go down here soon. Also, Lingli, the little baby, has grown up so much. She's so huge. She's grown so much over the course of this. And of course, the moment that MaoMao believes that Jinshi's going to come, she's like, oh, does he have to? And they're like, yes. And so I like this one handmaid that's just like, Lingli's first public appearance. She has to look amazing. Has to be great. This is war. We want in the temple. It's like, her attitude is so gung-ho. I love it. She's here. She is here. This is war. We're going to be the ones to win. And the other 2 handmaidens are like, oh my God. So yeah. And then MaoMao notes that she doesn't have a lot of handmaids. So MaoMao cannot not stand out. So like, well, we have to put some makeup on you. Okay. And she's like, and we need to hide your freckles. And she's like, The fact that she paints the freckles on now the OP makes a little bit more sense. I'm like, oh, so she's just naturally pretty. And she's been, you know, trying to hide it. And she's like, I have to smile at people. I have to act friendly. She's like, I'm going to need an iron bladder for this. She's like, this is going to be miserable. So instead, she makes these little orange and ginger candies, which sound delicious. Like, I was watching and my mouth was watering. I was like, I kind of want some orange and ginger candies now that we're thinking about it. I really, really want them. And then everybody else starts finding out. She's like, well, I'm putting pocket warmers inside these pockets inside so I can help withstand the cold. And everybody's like, please make me some. And girl, once you start saying that you have a talent, everybody's going to want to start you making them for them. And who's she to say no? She gets all these custom orders. And of course, Jinshi and Gaoshun are like, hey, I love that Gaoshun's like, I'm sorry. As they like come in with their own pockets for her to add. She's like, damn it. And even the seamstress and the cook for the emperor come in and ask for one. So it's like, MaoMao is making a name for herself. If she's not careful, and we're going to talk about that with the hairpin, she's going to be definitely pursued by others. I love the shot of Gokyo with little Lingli. I love that shot. Like, I don't know why Gokyo is worried. Girl's got some boobs herself. I don't know. Liwa may have some massive ones, but I don't think Gokyo's doing bad. I think she's doing all right. But Lingli is so cute. I love that. Her just sleeping there with her daughter. It's so sweet. So cute. But yeah, so they're all getting ready, and they decide to put the makeup on her. But before that, she does unwrap the bandages showing the poison on her arm. Again, Jinshi knew nothing of how she got there originally. He knows nothing about the poison on the arm. There's so much about MaoMao that Jinshi doesn't know that I'm like, girl, when he finds out, you're just going to make him fall even more in love with you and feel for you. You just don't even know. But I like that she has this like plant above her bed. Is it supposed to be like, what is that plant that's above her bed? Is it, I don't want to say hemlock, but like, what is it supposed to do? Interestingly enough. And she's like, let's make some of those just in case. So I don't know what she's talking about. Make some of those too, just in case. Maybe for like some salve or something in case if she needs it. I'm curious. There's a lot being set up in this episode that I have a feeling is going to come back and be a thing next week, but we don't know what it is yet. And so he's like, well, regarding for the search for those with burns on their arms, no luck. He's like, no. So somebody, like, he's like, how did we stumble across one thing of fireworks, one thing of rosin, and that was the only one? He's like, something's amiss. So he's like, I hope everything goes smoothly and I'm just worrying for no reason, but something is amiss. Anyway, so setting out stuff at the garden party, getting everything set up to look its best. Gokyo does look beautiful in crimson. She looks really pretty. The red and salmon and jade look lovely together. And she has like all the hair adornments. It's really pretty. And so she gives them all different things to wear. It's really cute. Like all the hair ornaments and the earrings and the hairpins. And then she gives MaoMao. She's like, you're my lady in waiting, so you ain't gonna look like trash. I love Gyoko's like, look, I know you don't like jewelry and that's cool and all, but I got a reputation to maintain, so you're going to look classy in front of everybody. If you're my lady in waiting, that's just how this is going to go. And then they're like getting ready to pull her makeup and stuff on. And that's when they figure out that the freckles aren't real. And she's like, they caught me. They got me, gal. So we see Li Hua getting ready with her escorts. She has several. She has like 10 ladies in waiting. Now, we see there are 5 lady in waitings with Li Shu, who again, she has like a little star on her banner. She looks like Rainbow Bright. And then we see the other one, Ado, and she has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at least with her. Interesting. Interesting indeed. So of course, Jinshi shows up. But first he stops by Li Shu and he's like, oh, concubine Li Shu, I look forward to seeing you at the garden party. And girl is, I like that she's instantly enamored. And the handmaids are like, girl, what are you doing? Like, that he's trying to like get you to be a traitor. Don't be doing anything crazy, girl. But she's enamored. And so last is the precious consort, Lady Gyokyo. And he's so excited to go. And he has like he has the pin in his hair and has like his special garb on and everything. And Gaoshun's like, he's really excited to go. He must favor. Well, he says he seems to favor concubine Gyokyo. I was like, yeah, he favors going there because of MaoMao. And that's when Gaoshun says, well, could it be because of his favorite toy? Now, here's the thing. He phrases it like MaoMao's a toy, but I think that might change after this episode with what she tells him. right? So they end up seeing everybody, and it's like, it's so perfect. Like the moment he's like, oh, you look so great, Gaoqiu. You look absolutely wonderful. And then the moment he turns around and sees MaoMao, he's like, oh, now I need to check in on the princess. And that's when he sees MaoMao. And Jinshi is like starstruck. It's like love at first sight. She looks so pretty with like the rouge and everything. So cute. She's like, hi, Master Jinshi. And he's just like, stunned! Stunned into oblivion! Stunned! Stunned. Everyone's dream is to make their partner stunned at first sight. And there it is. And he's like, oh, it's you! I didn't recognize you. And he's like, are you wearing makeup? And she's like, no, I'm not. And he's like, but your freckles are gone. She's like, yeah, I washed them off. She's like, I just happen to have great skin. And she's like, no, I didn't cover them with makeup. I removed my makeup. I just put some eyeshadow on. And I like at first he's confused. And he's like, well, that doesn't make sense. You're contradicting yourself. And she's like, oh my God. And she's like, I should have just nodded along. But I like the peacock that's on his robes. And she's like, I put dry clay on my face every day to add freckles. But I already had makeup on every time you saw me before this. Cosmetics aren't just for making a face more beautiful. And he's like, well, why would you do that? And that's when she tells him, she's like, do you really want to know? She's like, so that I wouldn't be drugged into a back alley. And yeah, and the illustration, and that just makes like him just stop. And the illustration of a man trampling over flowers is, that's all you need. Just that image alone says everything. She's like, people sometimes leaving, she's like, I live near the brothels, but not every man would be left sexually satisfied. There were some that couldn't afford it, some that had diseases, and some that were violent. And they didn't get satisfied there. So they're not going to pick on a girl with no chest, ugly and skinny and short. She's not going to be a target. Like, it was just a matter of self-defense. And he's like, and the way that Jinshi is immediately like serious. He's like, well, were you ever hurt? Were you ever dragged away? And she's like, well, attempts were made, but I got kidnapped instead. She's like, they must have just saw me as something that was marketable. And that's it. And she's very nonchalant about it. But he's like, well, aren't you angry about that? And he's like, I'm sorry we couldn't police them. And she was like, she turns around to him. She's like, well, I don't care if you couldn't police them. She's like, you know, she's like, it wouldn't have made a difference because when I got here, a buyer can't tell if you're kidnapped or if you're sold off. I like the way she phrases it. She says, you know, a buyer can't tell if you were kidnapped or just sold off legally, so there's one less mouth to feed. She's like, people end up here all the time, whether they've been kidnapped or whether because the country and the people that your emperor is over can't eat. And it's like, and she just says that. She's like, so what? Like, why would you be expected to police them? She's like, it's not your fault. But he's so serious. He's like, doesn't that make you angry that they weren't policed? And she's like, well, of course it does, but it's not your fault. And Jinshi just, the fact that she doesn't blame him, she's like, you're just a eunuch here. Like, I'm not expecting you to do anything about it. I feel like it touched a nerve into something that happened to him, but we're not ready to know that yet. But I love how strong she is in that moment to just be like, this is just the way it is for me. It's not right, but what are you going to do about it? It's like, oh. She's like, there's nothing you can do. And I love that he gets frustrated. And so he says he's sorry. And he takes out the hairpin and he gives it to her. She's like, and they're both so oblivious. She's like, well, he's being straightforward. And then he gives the pin to her. And of course, Gokyo's like, oh my God. And then all the other handmaidens are like, oh my God. Like, just, this is happening. And Gaoshun's like just doesn't say anything. But she's like, oh. And of course, she's like, well, that hurts. What are you doing? And she's like, I'm sorry. It's yours. And he's got such the blush on his face. And then he like pats her head and leaves her. And he's like, I'll see you at the party. And it's like, oh. So in that moment, Gaoshun's like, okay, let's go. I want them to follow up on that. And of course, she takes the hairpin out and is like, what the heck? And she's like, what is this? Why do I have a man's hairpin? And all the girls are like, oh, we're so jealous that you have this. It's so nice. She's like, I want it. And at first she's like, well, I could give it away, but how would I split this? She's ready to give it away. And Gyokyo's like, no, no, no. She's like, you broke our promise because now you're not mine alone. And MaoMao's like, what? She doesn't get it. She doesn't understand what it means. She's like, what does that mean? And the garden party starts before she can find out. So, in case if you're curious, hairpins have a lot of meaning, but according to China Daily, the source I found, hairpins were also common gifts for a man to give his girlfriend during ancient times. And there's an old tradition in China where a woman would cut a small lock of hair to give to their beloved at their engagement, so hair decorations symbolize a promise of love. Now, to me, I don't necessarily think it means that Jinshi's in love with her, but I think he's giving her the pin as a means of protection. So, where he knows she put the makeup on to mismark her face so that she wouldn't be a target, he's putting the hairpin in her hair, and it's his hairpin to say, you're under my protection. As long as you're here, nobody's going to bother you with this hairpin in because it's going to mean that you're with me. Now, will that lead to a bunch of women being jealous of MaoMao because they don't have Jinshi's hairpin? I don't know. But I feel like that's what he's doing. He's like, this will keep other men here from targeting you. So don't worry. Now, I don't want her to just take out the hairpin and throw it back to him. I want her to like appreciate it. And he was giving her like a very sincere gesture. But it's MaoMao, so I don't know how girl's gonna take it. So I'm like, girl, accept the offer. He's being real nice. He's really attractive. He's nice and attractive. He's kind of a peacock, but it's okay. Just accept it and roll with it. I don't know. I do want to make note, there was a hairpin during the Qing dynasty that just recently sold in 2011. I say recently, it's been a while. But it sold for $24,000. And a pair of hairpins during the Qing dynasty sold for a total of $14,000 at the 2011 autumn auctions. And they're really pretty. They're like very adorned. I'll show you all a picture of them. They're like adorned with like different peacocks and different other designs and clouds and things like that. It's very pretty. Very pretty. But yeah. So the rest of this episode, we're getting ready to start this garden party before we can go into any more details about it. And she's like, well, it's starting. And there's all these dancers, all these leaves are blowing. I can see why they all wanted the heat packs because it's starting to be autumn. They all have the sitar players, all the different instruments going. I think of Lan Wangji playing that one, like the water Ouija board playing it. But yes, then we see Li Shu, we see Gokyo, and then we see Aduo and Li Hua. And they're all sitting there, and it just looks like it's just a calm, little peaceful garden party. And the Emperor's just sitting there right at the lead. So, what we gonna do about this? Interesting! And then all the eunuchs are sitting there as well. So, meanwhile, there's somebody tampering with the food. Of course there is. And there's somebody with some hair going on back there. What she be doing, I don't know. I'll be curious to see what happens next week. It's going to be hard to wait. It's going to be hard to wait. So I might wait. I might go ahead. I'll try to wait until I get some comments for a previous episode that's aired to look through those. But it's going to be hard, y'all. It's going to be very difficult. If I don't wait, I'm sorry. But I'll do my best to wait a little bit. But this episode, just obsessed. Obsessed. I've talked a lot about SA and other shows, but as someone who was a victim of that myself, there are ways to do it, and there are ways to talk about it, and for it to be palpable, and there are reactions characters should have to it, and Jinshi's reaction and his care for her and immediate empathy for her was just, it is like, it cuts to my core. I'm like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to see more, but yes, so I'm super excited. I hope you all are as well, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye.